welcome to the Saturday special of ABC News. I'm Jun Hong, and we will be talking about behavior of GDP during economic downturn. So, Malaysia has experienced upturns and downturns, especially in recent years, and 1997, 2018, and the weird behavior of GDP in 2015. It is very important to analyze the reason behind these fluctuations, because this can actually cause a huge impact on our economy. And I would like to talk about some of the backgrounds based on the internet. There is reasons behind this fluctuation of GDP because of changes in consumer spending, which is very reasonable, and rising interest rate, government spending reduction, and some of the environmental factors. As I am not expertise in this area, so today we invite some of the very special guests and professionals to talk about the recession and the behavior of GDP during 1997, 2008, and 2015. So I would like to invite Ming Liang and Ling Sun to talk about the behavior of GDP in 1997, which is the economic recession of Malaysia.
Good afternoon. I'm Ming Liang and he's Ling Shun. So, Mr. Ng, I would like to ask you, can you explain to our audience what actually happened during the 1997 Asian financial crisis?
Okay, so actually we do know that Asian financial crisis is jolted the world economy, and its effect is both broad and deep. And then the country is used to experience 8 to 10% of the growth, positive growth, but then saw plunge up to negative 15%. And prior to crisis, Malaysia actually has high growth rates, low inflation rates, low employment rate, high savings, and low external debt. And then by that time, Malaysia is known as a miracle economy in the East Malaysia. But then after the crisis, Malaysia's stock market fall by 68.58%, and then the dollar ringgit plunged by 37% between July 1st, 1997 until the September 8th of 1998.
Okay, thank you. So according to your professional opinion, what do you think are the key factors that contributes to this major downturn of economy?
Okay, so from my perspective, actually there are three major causes that cause the behavior of the GDP of Malaysia to become downturn. The first one is sectoral performance. According to Auckland's law, GDP is negative related to unemployment. And then during crisis, unemployment rate to actually increase, and then this causes the GDP to decrease. And then the unemployment increase is actually mainly due to the fall in output. And then the construction sector actually suffered the most, shrank about 28 to 29%, and the manufacturing shrank about 80.7%. And then agriculture is quite mild, it's only about 4.5%. And then the second one will be due to the inflation. Just like what we mentioned just now, the inflation rate is actually increased after the financial crisis, and then there is a decrease in the purchasing power of money, which actually the real value of money is actually decreased. In turn, reduce the consumption and to make the GDP to decline. And then inflation is actually negative related to the interest rate as well. So according to the quantity theory of money or Fisher theory, supply and demand of money actually is the determinant for inflation. And then money supply actually grows and then price increase, and this to actually reduce the purchasing power and causes our GDP to be reduced. The third one will be the exchange rate. Actually, during the financial crisis, our ringgit slipped from 2.5 ringgit to USD 1 to 4.88 ringgit Malaysia on 7th of the January 1998, and this actually caused our government purchasement to reduce, and then in turn our GDP also reduced. So Mr. Lim, so what actually did our government do to rescue our economic status from the GDP downturn during the 1997 Asian financial crisis?
Okay, so actually the government did several things to recover the GDP to its initial status. So the first thing is they lowered the interest rate. So initially they followed the IMF policies, which is increasing the interest rate, but that doesn't work that way. And now they implemented lower interest rate to rescue the microeconomy and also revive the real economy. Lower interest rate actually induces higher borrowing and reducing savings, and therefore will stimulate spending of the consumers. And according to the IS curve, The lower interest rate will stimulate investment spending of firms, and which drives up the total expenditure. So to restore the equilibrium, the consumption will increase and output increase. Therefore, it actually affects also the GDP to increase according to the formula. So next, the government actually did fix the exchange rate. Malaysia government implemented new policy instrument for exchange rate to end the previous flexible exchange rate system. So this provides greater certainty and opportunities for importers and also exporters, and encouraging more international trade and investment. Exchange rate depreciation causes faster growth of real GDP because rise in export and also fall in imports. Therefore, the high next exports will increase the GDP of Malaysian economy.
Thank you, Lin Sun and Ming Liang, for the very informative talk about the economic behavior of GDP during 1997. And I would like to proceed to invite Alvin and Kelly, which are our special guests and professional in economics of today, to talk about the economic behavior of GDP in 2008, which is a global financial crisis. And stay tuned.
Hi everyone, I'm Lim Yong Sing and she's Kelly. Yeah, so Kelly, can you explain to the audience what happened during the global financial crisis in 2008 and how it affected Malaysia GDP?
Okay, well, in 2008, the global financial crisis initiated by the US housing market affect the rest of the countries through capital flows, trade flows and commodity prices. As we can see, for Malaysia, the trade shock was one of the most significant issues. Then Malaysia had little exposure to collateral debt obligations that originated in the US subprime market. There are a few factors that lead to recession of gross domestic product in Malaysia during 2008.
Okay, thank you Kelly. So Kelly, you say that there are a few factors, right? Can you explain to me what are the factors that cause a drop in GDP in Malaysia during 2008?
Okay, well, one of the main factors is inadequate private investment. At the early of 2008, the private investment where sales of bonds directly to investors was strong. However, due to the capital expansion activities, slowdowns towards year-end as rejected investment decisions lead to sharp global economic downturn. Example, imports of capital goods shows a decline by 7.9% near the end of 2008. Furthermore, loan disbursed to businesses and private debt securities issued for new activities also indicates lower investment activities towards year-end of 2008. Although gross FDI inflows remain high at 51 billion, the worsening global economic environment has affected inflow in the second half of the 2008. And the second reason of economic downturn was due to the drop in capital flows. During the global financial crisis in 2008, banks and financial institutions in the United States and West reduced their international businesses and focused on their home market. It causes a big drop in funds flowing into Malaysia, as you can see in Table 2, with net financial and capital flows falling from 37.7 billion in 2007 to 118.5 billion in 2008. So, Alvin, what solution do you think that can help to overcome the GDP drop in 2008?
Okay, so basically there are two solutions to solve the issues above. So the first one, economic stimulus package. On the 4th of November of 2008, the government announced the first economic stimulus package, which is amounted to 7 billion ringgit Malaysia, and the government claimed that the funds would be allocated to the project with high impact on the economy. Besides, government also introduced some policies to directly support private consumption, such as reduction of EPF contribution from 11% to 8%, higher vehicle loan eligibility for the government officers, and etc. So in the March of 2009, the government also introduced a second stimulus package which amounted to 60 billion ringgit. The theory behind the usefulness of a stimulus package is rooted in the Keynesian economics, which argues that the impact of recession can be lessened with the increase of government spending. As you can see from the graph, the increase in the government spending can lead to the increase in the real GDP. So the second solution is by lowering the interest rate. So when the interest rate is reduced, meaning that there are more incentive for the people to borrow as the cost of borrowing is reduced. An increase in borrowing means that there will be more money in circulation, less incentive to save, more incentive to spend and invest. Lowering interest rate also can weaken the exchange rate of a country, thereby leading to the boost in exports. When the exports are increased, right, more money enters the economy, encouraging spending and stirring up the economy. So overall, as you can see from the graph, from the IS curve, lower interest rate cause a rise in investment, consumption, net export. Then it will lead to an increase in real GDP and increase in the inflation rate.
Thank you very much, Alvin and Kelly, for the very informative conversation. And I will be inviting Jabber, which is the international professional economics, to let us know about recession during 2015. Thank you.
Okay, let's start talking about the downturn in 2015 of the GDP. So we have different factors why the GDP slowed down in 2015. We can observe the Malaysia GDP from 2010 to 2018 has been increasing steadily with an exception, which is year 2015. The dropping of the 2015 GDP is nothing like recession, but is caused by the slower global economic growth and internal factors, such as tax reformation by government of Malaysia. Let's take a look at these factors. So one of them is the slowdown in global trade. Global trade growth experienced a sharp deceleration in 2015, registering its lowest pace of expansion since the 2008 global financial crisis. While Malaysia being a very resourceful country, export sector has been proper ever since Industrial Revolution. The main countries that import Malaysia goods are Singapore, China, USA, Japan, and Thailand. During this slowdown in global trade, these countries just stopped buying Malaysian goods, causing a fall in national GDP. Another factor that we have is the implementation of the goods and service tax. On the 1st of April 2015, the goods and service tax was introduced as a standard rate of 6%. Similar to experiences in other countries, the major impact of GST was on the change of behavior of households. Prior to the implementation of GST, it was observed that households brought forward their purchases of goods in anticipation of higher prices post of the tax introduction. In particular, households front-loaded purchases of durable items such as passengers' cars, furniture, and electrical appliances. Notably, the uncertainty over the impact of GST on car prices led to a marked increase in car sales, particularly in March 2015. Households also front-loaded purchases of basic necessities, such as food and beverages and household items. So after the implementation, the consumption patterns that have been increasing slowed down, causing a drop in Malaysia's GDP in 2015.
Just now, Javier was talking about some of the factors that cause the weird behavior of GDP in 2015. Now, I would like to talk about some of the suggestions that can be taken to avoid the plummet of GDP in 2015. Well, some of the actions that can be taken by government is to do some changes in fiscal policy. As the global trade volume subdue, the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia, can appropriately adjust the interest rate to be lower to stimulate domestic demand of money. If the interest rate is lower, borrowing money will certainly become cheaper, and at the same time, saving money will not earn much profit to the account saver. Once the money becomes cheap, savers will start to invest their money in other alternatives which has reasonable returns. Besides, consumer spending will be lifted as cheaper money is now available. This is mainly due to wealth effect. Now people has more money to spend, so the consumer spending will increase. As the graph below shows, when the interest rate is lower, the investment is higher and the saving rate is lower. So instead of focusing on how to increase the export amid of depressed global demand, we should focus on the domestic demand. Other benefit of lowering the interest rate is weakening domestic currency that made export more attractive again. This is mainly due to the exchange rate effect. Suppose when the interest rate lowers, Malaysia bond will be less attractive comparing to other countries. Thus, foreign, local, and institutional investors will purchase foreign investment products instead of local opportunity. The outflow of money takes our domestic currency less attractive, and thus the demand drops. That will cause weaker domestic currency that can be beneficial to our economic, as our domestic products are now cheaper than other countries due to the gap of the currency spread. So our export will become cheaper, and thus the demand will rise again. So other actions that can be taken by the government to avoid the plummet of the GDP in 2015 is actually good and service tax. So if you recap a bit, good and service tax is actually implemented during the year of fiscal year 2015. And good and service tax is Malaysia began as a very good idea to make the country less dependent of its oil industry run by Petronas. It became an excellent source of money when the oil crisis began in early 2016. Malaysia wasn't as dependent anymore as in previous year. Since the tax was unpopular, it was reduced to 0% on 1 June of 2018. And this year, Malaysia experimented a big improvement to its GDP. This means that a good way to increase GDP in Malaysia is to eliminate as they make people feel that their purchase power is not that high. So it will reduce the consumption and hence the GDP. So the action that can be taken by Malaysia government is actually to abolish good and service tax, and besides, it can actually lower the interest rate to avoid the plummet of the GDP in 2015. Thank you for all the special guests today to attend our session today, and I believe all the audience definitely learned a lot about economic today. So I would like to do a bit of conclusions. The main GDP downturn occurred during the year of 1997, 2008, 2015 are each contributed by different factors. And these directly cause low purchasing power, high unemployment rate, and also economic recession. So Malaysia, who have encountered several economic downturns and affect the GDP, did several amendments to restore the economic to its original positions and going back to healthy GDP growth. This shows that Malaysia has a very strong economic fundamental to recover from the recessions, which is a very good news to all the Malaysians. However, many people are saying that financial crisis will be happening in 10 years' time. The last financial crisis happened in 2008, and many say that financial crisis will be happening in 2018. That did not happen. So the question is, when is the next financial crisis? And what will be the reasons that will cause the next recessions? And are we strong enough and ready to face the next recession? This is the questions that I'm putting forth to all of you to ponder upon. And thank you for today's show.